All right, what's up, guys? We are going to be live doing our podcast here, and while I'm doing so, I'm also going to be recording myself building the Ferrari. We're putting that together where we talk about some of the things that went on in Barcelona, plus some of the things that are going on this year at the Formula One for Formula One. So, without further ado, this is Outlap Critical. And if you guys don't follow me already, check us out on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I'm lying, some of those things. It's on TikTok and YouTube. That's it. So follow us there if you haven't already, especially if you're following me here live. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into it. I think the first story that we definitely have to talk about is going to be Lewis Hamilton, of course. Another outstanding drive. Continues to prove that, he's got what it takes to be a championship level driver. Some of the things about the race that I thought were pretty interesting. Some of the things I thought about the race pretty interesting is that Lewis kind of from the beginning kind of made some good decisions. I thought he starting on the soft tires, which I still don't agree with the decision to be on the softs in the beginning, but that being said, starting on soft tire, the expectation is to get further along faster, kind of sacrifice the length of the tire life in order to, gain some positions early. It's kind of the idea behind it. And he kind of got a better jump than George did. But then I won't even say the second phase. Kind of almost immediately, George picked up and was gone. At least got out in front of Lewis, and so that part of the strategy didn't work. And once that happened, Lewis decided, I think, to manage those tires really well. And instead of trying to, continually press George, allowed George to build up that couple second lead, and then slowly but surely just started to, ease his way into the race. Never really felt in danger at any point. But it was just interesting that the entire time he was managing those tires, it seemed as though everybody else was doing the same thing on the medium tires. And so one other thing about that soft tire is if you watch him qualifying, he really didn't, if you watch him qualify, they really didn't have a great time with those tires. I mean, we're talking about one lap maximum. Lewis was running on them for 2 or 3 maybe. A couple others were, but those times were falling off a cliff literally the second that tire was spent. And so it was interesting seeing them get on that soft tire. And so Lewis hits the pit and kind of ignites that chain reaction. I think Mercedes reacted to it a little bit sooner than it needed to. But at the same time, Lewis then comes out of the pits with the hard tire, and that's when the race that's when we kind of saw that Lewis actually had an opportunity to get something done here. And the race goes as it does from there, and so we all knew what happens from there. And Lewis then manages the race perfectly, gets out in front, stays out in front, does all the things he needs to do to win the race. And the next thing you know, Lewis is winning another race. And so aside from the excitement of Lewis winning that race in general, I think something said about just how much the paddock loves Lewis Hamilton. They're competitors. They are enemies at sometimes. They fight hard, but when Lewis wins, it kind of means something to the entire paddock. And I think that kind of goes back to show you who the main characters, so to speak, of the paddock are. And so with Lewis winning that one, that's number 106. I often think, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, because the next couple of tracks that are coming up are going to be engine heavy tracks, and we know this is where Mercedes lives. And so, I'm not counting anybody out, obviously, because nobody really thought that Lewis was going to put in that qualifying lap and therefore putting himself in a position, which is a whole nother subject. Lewis absolutely put in a lap that, that was a championship level lap. I think it was like, I don't want to say the number. It was like 7/10 or something. It wasn't 7/10. Lewis was close. He was within striking distance of winning, pole position in that race, which I honestly think, starting in second may have been better, just for this particular race, and, having to, I don't know why they gave they gave Lewis a wrench, like he in there, like Lewis in there, or Charles. I guess he yellow, so I don't know, but whoever it is, they gave him a wrench. Good and well, he not gonna be in that car, putting nothing together. All right, so that being said, I think second was the best place to start for Lewis in the race, and then everything just kind of came together. The car just came alive, and it wasn't like that the entire practice sessions all the way leading up into quali. Lewis really looked like he was on the quote back foot, as they like to say, right? And Charles looked better than he did pretty much the entire time, especially with Charles on the new brakes. Things seem to be working well. Of course, then Charles crashes, but at least for the most part, Charles was, pretty much looking like he was taking back, the reins there, so to speak. And then from then on, quali on, Lewis started looking better and better and better and better, and then put in that lap. And I think Lewis putting in that lap had everything to do with Charles crashing. I think that Lewis put in that lap, Charles saw what was going on, and pushed extra hard, maybe harder than he needed to on those brakes that he doesn't really understand yet. It's going to be a new feeling for him. And so, I wonder if that contributed to the fact that Lewis was doing so well at automatically. So so something else that I've been thinking a lot about with the quali. I know we're going backwards. We haven't really dug too deep into the race yet, but bear with me on this. The thing about those practices and those quali laps, I get the feeling that some people are riding with those engines turned down. Like, because it still doesn't baffle me that they all just claim randomly the car just felt alive all of a sudden, and they just had this magical lap. And I just don't buy it, because I was watching some of Lewis's onboards, and I was watching how much of a terrible time he was having in that car, leading all the way up to the moment where he all of a sudden had a magical lap, and it was like, it seemed as though he was getting all the way to that final sector and then letting off just a little bit before he was going over the line, costing himself just a smidge bit, costing himself time. And I don't know if that's the case or if he just had the engine turned down, but it just doesn't make sense to me that suddenly Lewis just puts in a magical lap when he hasn't been able to do anything the entire time. And so, that's a little bit conspiracy theory-ish, I guess, but, I see the McLarens doing the same thing. McLarens do it all the time. Like, they keep their engines turned down pretty much until the last moment when they need to use it. I mean, some of that could be just saving the engine for when you need it, but another times it's like, you guys are never going to get on the race pace and get exactly where you need to be if you're practicing with the engine turned down. I don't understand the sandbagging. What's it matter if they know what you got, because they don't got it? It's not like they can develop, whatever it is. It's not like they can develop whatever it is that you have in that short amount of time anyway. And so, like, I'm always a fan of just going all out, practicing and getting what you need to get done right from the jump. No engines turned down, no sandbagging, just going after it. But anyway, Lewis puts in the lap, Charles crashes, which I'm not sure if that has much to do with how his car performed in the race or what happened there, but that could be the case as well. A lot of speculating, obviously, guys, but I just, with the way Lewis has been driving guys recently, you can't tell me that some of this isn't getting into Charles's head. And, the other thing about that is, as for development goes, all the reporting says that development has been going towards Lewis's style of driving. we still have so much season to go, so I don't want to just, declare the race won or anything like that. But, at the same time, Lewis, once he gets into this hunt, I'm not sure there's going to be much anybody can do to stop him. You give the guy a car and you give him a way to fight, I think this is going to be an opportunity for him to really, his legacy is secured regardless, but, you really want to lock that thing in and submit it, especially with the Verstappen threat coming through. This is going to quiet a lot of people down. Just the way that he does that is just continually, pushing the pace the way he does it, things like that. So let's get back to the race. So Lewis controlled the race from the very beginning. Just the way he drove was a championship level drive. Got out for the communication with him and his racing engineer is outstanding. This is worlds better than what we were seeing last year. At least they're answering him. That's the least they could do, I guess. But Lewis and his race engineer seem to be getting on just right to where their communication levels and what they were talking about during the race seemed to be, exactly what he needed when he needed it. When Lewis didn't understand what he was saying, they would ask for clarification, and the engineer was right back to him explaining exactly what he meant. Things like that, just small things like that. And then the motivational way that he was kind of speaking to Lewis throughout the drive, just keeping him motivated and explaining to him that he was catching up, that he was, doing my favorite part was when he told him that he needed the best 7 laps that he's got, and that this was the opportunity. Just enough motivation, but then also enough kind of a challenge almost to say, hey, listen, I'm challenging you to go out there and get this done. And Lewis went out and performed. And so, the question going forward is going to be whether or not Lewis is... The question not going forward is going to be whether or not Lewis is actually going to... Is he actually going to continue this, or was this track specific? Right? Because... if it's track specific, then we're going to need another track kind of like this in order for Lewis, like a high deck track like that where Lewis can really speak to the tires. We're going to need another track like that in order for Ferrari to perform again. But, with these upgrades coming up, and we keep hearing everything about this AUDO and, when that's actually going to happen. But with these engine upgrades coming, you've got to wonder if Ferrari can close the gap because of the advantages they have with the smaller turbo already. So Ferrari could end up closing that gap, but the question is, how wide will the gap be by the time they get there? Kimi does still have a sizable gap. I think it's a 41-point lead over Lewis and a 60-something or another point lead over George. And so, the next few races, Kimi's going to want to prove a point, much like George was on his way to proving a point before Lewis ran him down. I think Mercedes also has a little bit of culpability in the strategy calls here. But we'll get to George and Mercedes here in a bit. But, what do you guys think? Is Lewis on for, a storming comeback to jump into this title fight and, actually have an opportunity to pull something off by the end of the year? Was this a one-off? Is Charles going to be coming back? If that Ferrari is live, is Charles going to be in that hunt as well? Or is Lewis going to continue to put the manners on him? What do you guys think about that? Okay. Next up, we're going to be talking about George Russell and Mercedes. And, the opportunity they have in front of them versus, what the realities are of George Russell's situation. So with George Russell, I think that this race was something that he absolutely had to have happen. He needed a win. And honestly, a 1-2, this is a better result than getting a 1-2, with him and Kimi. But, he needed to actually win the race, if you know what I mean. He needed to beat his teammate. He needed to get back on track. Excuse the pun, but he needed to get back on track. And that didn't happen. he looked sluggish throughout the race. Didn't seem to be able to really extend the gap. The gap that he did extend, the lead that he had gained, it really seemed as though that was due to the fact that, Lewis was basically nursing his tires. So then we get to the point where eventually in the race, it's clear that, first of all, it's clear that Kimi's faster than him the entire race. The entire race. It's Kimi for sure is faster. And so the entire race, Kimi's faster, and at the end, the very worst possible thing happens, and Kimi passes him on track for merit, like merit passed him. Nothing George could do about it. Say what you will about the energy management or whatever. Kimi caught up, Kimi passed him. And then, of course, his car went out. But, standing on that podium, George knows that he really should be standing in that third spot at the least. And I don't recall who was behind those. Who was it? Who came in third? It was Lewis, George, and all I can think about is Isaac Hadjar and Gasly now. But whoever came in third for the race was all British. Lando. Okay, so there's no guarantee Lando wasn't going to catch him too, because I'm telling you, George is having a bad race. And, these things are stacking upon each other. George is having a bad race upon bad race, and then the luck is happening bad. There's plenty of season left, but it's not like Kimi is lucking into these wins. Like, Kimi is winning these races in a dominant fashion, and so George has got to not only contend with that, but he's got to think about the fact that I think he has a 2-year contract. It's clear that Mercedes is most interested in retaining, their young superstar Kimi. It looks from all the different news that you've heard, at the very least, Max is sniffing around. And so where does that leave George at the end of the day? And that's why I say George needed this race. George needed to go out there and prove that he's a championship caliber driver, which I think he is. Like, I'm in no way saying that George is not a championship caliber driver, because he is. But he's been given this opportunity to do what he needed to do, and, now he's looking at, the deficit came down, but it came down via circumstance. Now, I guess you could say that evens it out, because George has been having some pretty bad luck as of late. But, when it comes down to it, we're going to look at this thing and we're going to recall the fact that George was on track. Kimi got behind him. Kimi passed him. And that seems to be what usually happens whenever they get close to each other on track. A little bit of contact here and there, that kind of a thing. But, it's starting to be clear that, like, Kimi's driving with a little bit of attitude now. He's driving with, ever since that incident in that race, and he got on the radio and said, if this is how we're driving, just let me know. And they told him basically chill. I think from that moment on, he was just telling them what they wanted to hear. Yeah, perfect, I'll do this. But you notice, whenever he got behind George, like, he was on him again. There's no, George is going to have to fight. He's in the worst possible position right now. And at a certain point, if Lewis continues this charge forward, then Mercedes is going to have to make a decision to have George basically play second fiddle. You can't have each other fighting. Like, half the reason Lewis pulled up on these guys in the first place is they were fighting. When really they should have been fighting. They should have been working together as a team. Let them fight later on in the race, But you've got a car that's obviously quicker, and they're pulling up. That car pulling up behind you tells me that we need to make a better coaching decision, from the pit wall. And let these guys know basically, hey, no more squabbling. We got to get to the end of this race. We'll battle it out here, whatever. But, with the high degradation of those tires and half the field on softs, you got to realize there's probably going to be a safety car at some point, at least in my opinion. I just feel like the tires are going to be wearing down to a point where there's going to be some kind of incident at some point. I just feel like Mercedes didn't call that one right. They reacted immediately whenever Lewis jumped into the pits, And I just don't think they had to. And I think George was pretty upset about that too, because he was saying that he was pretty much trying to take care of his tires, and if he didn't need to do that, he should have been told that, so he could have built up a little bit more of a lead, which I really don't think would have mattered. But at the end of the day, you know, get me past you on track, bro. Get me past you on track, and in my opinion, there's no excuse for that. So, that's George. That's George Russell. I think that his opportunity for the rest of the year is going to be, one, show what kind of leadership abilities it has, and shows what kind of a teammate he can be. Because with all the development that's coming with this season right now, I really think that Ferrari is not the only team that's going to suddenly start seeing. I mean, first of all, the FIA has got Ferrari as Red Bull as the strongest engine. And so if they've got the strongest power unit, which is ridiculous. I mean, Mercedes obviously has it, but if we're to believe what they're saying, and Red Bull has the strongest engine, the development's coming for that car too. And those guys are working with the added pressure, knowing that Max could possibly be doing something different at the end of the season if this doesn't change up. And so I have full confidence in Red Bull. I think they're going to pull it together for sure. But with that being said, I feel like this season, the story really hasn't been written. I think this season is going to come in phases. This first phase has been Mercedes, and a little bit of Ferrari kind of sprinkled in. What is the second phase of the season going to be like? Who's going to be the one to kind of take control of the second half of the season? So, if you remember earlier last year, it was like Miami Grand Prix, I think. It was a Miami Grand Prix, and I believe it's when McLaren's kind of upgrades kind of came alive, and then all of a sudden, off to the races kind of a thing. Or was that 2 years ago? But you guys know what I'm talking about. So, the upgrades coming and Mercedes getting less, even though they are gonna get one, I believe, but they'll be getting less than some of the others, and they're supposedly getting close, or at least they're winning races now. So, somebody's going to be dropped into this, and I really think McLaren might be the one. They currently have a great setup, it seems, and it seems the only difference is it doesn't have the reliability, and the Mercedes seems to be having the same kind of reliability issues as well. They're both getting struck with that string of bad luck, and they're both Mercedes engines, or Mercedes power units rather. So, whatever's going on with that Mercedes and the electrical units, it seems to keep costing them races, whether it be Mercedes, the actual Mercedes team or the customer team. They seem to be costing them races at this point. And so, what is that going to play into? What kind of factor is that going to play into the season? What kind of factor is that going to play into the season? So, I don't know. The points are going to come at a premium, guys, and I really feel like, George had an opportunity to distinguish himself as, hey, I'm still the guy. I've just had a couple of races of bad luck. Look at me now. Look what we're doing. I thought maybe that was going to be the case. And, I mean, getting on pole was a great start. But, I think did anybody really think that George was actually going to, I'm doing a fantasy league called Pitlandia. If you guys aren't on that, check it out. It's really cool. It's an app. It's like a fantasy league, but it's done really differently. And I made George Russell as my pick to win the race. And you have to pick before quali. And so I just assumed George would be, on a tear. But, after quali, and Lewis was behind him, and you saw the lineup the way it was, you get that feeling it wasn't going to last, and it didn't. There's just not much you can say about it. It's just George is going to have to be better, and I think he'll be the first one to tell you that. But if George wants this title, this is his opportunity to go out there and get it, because there's absolutely no guarantee that there's no guarantee that you make it back to the dance, so to speak. So should George squander this opportunity, there's no guarantee that their car's the fastest car next year or the year after that. There's no guarantee that Kimi isn't given. Let's say Kimi does win. He's the champion. He's the one who gets the preferential treatment. Now they're going to move the car towards him. So George has really got a lot to think about here. Like, he's got to get it together. He's technically the team lead, and if he wants to remain that way, he's gonna have to actually get out there and put some performances in. He's gonna have to put some distance between him and Lewis. He's gonna have to get back in second place, not even second anymore. Like, he's gonna need some great drives. These next couple of tracks are all tracks that are great for him because they're all engine tracks. So George has a great opportunity to come back on this, but he's gonna have to fight Kimi off. And I'm telling you, Kimi's not having it anymore. He's not gonna let George slide by. He's not playing the team game. Like, he wants to fight. You can hear it on his radio messages. All right, so coming up next, I want to do a segment where we just basically try to fix the FIA, because the FIA is doing FIA things all the time. So stay tuned if you haven't already. Like, subscribe, follow, and we'll be right back. All right, so now we're going to talk about the FIA, and this is going to be a segment where we basically just try to fix whatever it is that the FIA has going on over there. And this week, last week, several weeks that we've been talking about what the FIA does. Whenever there's some kind of penalty, they always go through the same thing. You see this thing at the top, see the thing at the top, so-and-so is under investigation, okay? Cool, that means something happened on track. The stewards are going to be looking into it, and then they kind of give their ruling throughout. Sometimes it's right away, but then a lot of times they say that they're going to figure it out after the race, which makes no sense. What else are you doing up there? Like, if you're a race steward, you have one job, and somebody says there's an infraction of some kind, and you need to look into it. Okay, send it over to the steward. Have him just be the guy who looks over the replays. Have a replay guy. That replay guy, who should be at every single race, same guy, FIA. We're not switching stewards. Same team. That same guy looks at the replays. He's in New York or something like that. That's what they're doing in the NBA. Like, he's sending it to New York. The replay guy looks over it, decides whether or not it's an infraction, and then you have a letter of the law, and that's exactly how it gets penalized. And so there's never any, hey, we're going to figure it out at the end of the race. Unless that infraction happens literally right before they cross that finish line, there's no excuse for not giving an immediate answer, honestly. And so you call up, you figure out what's going on, you send it to the replay guy. The replay guy calls back and says, hey, so-and-so needs the penalty or no further investigation, done. We don't need to figure out, we don't need drivers coming across the finish line thinking that they won, thinking that they came in third, maybe getting on the podium, and then you calling up, be like, nah, you didn't actually. So, and then Alpine not telling that man, that was crazy. Alpine, y'all wrong for that. I know this is an FIA segment, but y'all not right for the way y'all handled that situation. But Pierre ended up getting it back, but FIA is like, I want you guys to start paying a little more attention. I'm talking to the FIA right now. I want you to start paying a little more attention and do common sense things. Like, if 25 people are speeding in the pit lane, obviously there's something going on with the way you're timing it. And then y'all come out and tell us, oh, this is the way we do it, and that's why. That makes no sense. Even if it's straight, it makes no sense. But to have it on a curb and you're still timing it that way, it makes no sense. Use the timer like everybody else. And you have the onboards where it shows them dropping the speed down to the pit limit, to the pit speed limit. And you're just ignoring it and giving these penalties out. And so that should be something that happens in less than 10 to 15 seconds. And it's something that you didn't need no extra evidence. You didn't want to be wrong, is what it seems like. And so FIA, let's get it together. What I really want you focused in on is making sure that for the next time, get a replay guy. Send him to every race or have him sitting stationary. I'll do it. Just I'll do it. I could look at a replay. And then they tell you what's going on. You send it back to whoever's making the decision on track. They make the decision on track, and then we're done. Very easy. There's no reason to belabor this 7-8 hours to the next day, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well now we have a decision on this thing after the fact. That stuff matters. And I mean, like a lot, like getting it right for the money's sake is one thing, but then there's a lot of stuff that's on track. Like Pierre earned that on track, for instance. And when he earned it on track, you should have been rewarded with getting on that podium, celebrating, going to the room, all that stuff, you know. And now you have to basically rewind that and just say, oops, my bad, basically. So, you know, I'd like to see the FIA clean that up. So, you know, if you guys need somebody to basically, I don't know, clean that up for you, hit me up. I got you. I'll take great care of you. All right, so championship picture going forward. Who's driving? Who's doing well this year? I think right now, you know, obviously you can't look past Kimi. Kimi is doing everything he's supposed to do right now. He's taking control. I think the thing about the Kimi thing is, I think Kimi always thought this is exactly what was going to be going on from the very beginning. Like he doesn't seem the least bit surprised about any of this. He's handling it like a champion. I think having Bono there is like the very best thing that could possibly happen. Because of Bono's relationship with Lewis, because of all the championships won. He's just got that experience as a, you know, racing engineer that can't be replaced. You know, that was the perfect pairing. After the first year Kimi had, you know, he changed it quite a bit this year. And I think it probably has a lot to do. I'm not sure who his physio is, but whomever his physio is doing a great job with him as well. He just seems very, very measured and mature, except for when he gets on that track with George. Like I'm telling y'all, if I'm looking forward to anything for the rest of the year, I want to see, you know, how far, you know, Kimi's going to push George. You know, then I want to see what George is going to do about it. You know, is George that championship driver that, you know, we think he is? Or, you know, because that's the thing at the beginning of the year. I'm telling you, George had all but written his name on that trophy, y'all. Like George had done everything but inscribed his name on the side of that trophy. You know, just the interviews he was giving, the air about him, you know, he was just, you know, and, you know, I don't blame the guy. I mean, he feels good, especially, you know, beginning of the year, you start doing well, you know, and the Storm Kimi pops up, you know, it's just one of those things where I want to see what a champion does to respond, you know, and in order for him to get this, tell you one thing, if George pulls this out, if George pulls this off, he would definitely be, I mean, depending on how, obviously, you know, let's just say that from whatever circumstances, George goes from where he's at right now to catching up to Kimi to overtaking Kimi to winning the championship. And I don't mean like Kimi has a bunch of bad luck and so George wins by default. I mean, like, let's just say that George comes back and actually makes this thing a competitive fight and gets that win. Or even gets within striking distance and loses or something like that. I think that's going to do a huge amount of, that's going to do a lot for George's career. And it's going to go a lot going forward. I mean, because you get your resume ready, brother. I mean, I think it's written on the wall. But when I say that, for two reasons, though. Because, George probably does not want to be on a team where he is the second fiddle. He's not down for that. When Lewis left, he basically, I mean, he assumed the role of team captain because he had a rookie, obviously, and I'm assuming that he doesn't want that to change. And so with that being said, if Kimi ends up winning this championship, you're obviously back in the number 2 slot. And do you want to be a number 2 driver for the rest of your career? Probably not. The question is, where do you go? You can't just up and go anywhere. There's not a lot of teams that actually, I mean, look at Carlos right now. Which a lot of people feel bad for Carlos, guys, but I do not. Like, he had every opportunity to, you know, win some of those races with Ferrari, you know, put himself in front of Charles, but, you know, Charles is kind of giving him the business while he was there. can't really help that. But anyway, if George wants to be a number two driver for the rest of his career, then sure, stay where you're at. But, I'm assuming he doesn't want to be a number two driver. The other thing is you got a lot of talented rookies. You got a lot of talented, I guess you got a lot of talented drivers on the grid right now. Second years, I guess they're not rookies anymore. Isaac is very talented. Kimmy obviously is very talented. George is finding that out the hard way. What else? Ollie Berman, very talented. Arvid Lindblad, very talented. And then you've got, some of that mid-tier, Esteban Ocon. Not really. Carlos Sainz is in there, still a very capable racer if you put the car behind him. And so, this is why it's crazy important for George to get this while he can. He had such an overwhelming advantage at the beginning of the year and, couldn't capitalize on it. And of course, not all of it is George's fault. Some of it is to do with, reliability issues. But that's just racing. I mean, that is what it is. I mean, like, for instance, Kimmy had to deal with it this weekend. I mean, it was his turn. Finally George had to go, that's upside down. Daggone it. George had the opportunity to finally, do something this week, and I just feel like at every turn, George dropped the ball on this one. And so everything that happens next is going to be up to him. He's going to have to be the one to turn this around. Like, he's going to have to be the one to, make this a fight. And so, okay. So, Barcelona's complete now. What are your, overall feelings about, just where we are this season? A lot has been said from the very beginning. I mean, you start the very beginning of the year, and I got to tell you, the amount of negativity that race fans have towards, towards the new regulations and towards what they're seeing on the field, what they're seeing on the grid, every single little thing is being criticized and taken apart, and then the racing starts, and we're complaining about how the overtakes are happening, and it's yo-yo racing, and it's this, and it's da-da-da-da. And it's like, I get it. It's not what you were, used to, but things are going to change. And there's not a sport. There's not one sport that hasn't made changes. And with Formula One, at least it's on a timer. You know exactly when the changes are going to happen. So, in my opinion, you basically have two options. You can complain about it until your face is blue, or you can enjoy the racing for what it is. It's not going to be V8 engines, stick shifting. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to be that. Those days are over. So what we do have right now, in my opinion, is some incredible racing. The drivers are having to apply themselves. They're having to think through these problems that they're having with the engines and things like that. Sure, it's not to say that this set of regulations is without criticisms. I mean, obviously there are plenty of criticisms that can be made. What I'm saying is, let's just take more time to enjoy what we have. These world-class athletes navigating these vehicles at breakneck speed, at G-forces. Let's enjoy that. Like, the whole reason why we all started watching racing in the first place. Let's enjoy that. Instead of, complaining at every single turn that we can get about every single little detail. And so where we are this year as a racing, where we are so far for the season, this has been one of my favorite seasons so far. It honestly is throwing a monkey wrench in it. Like, you just don't know what's going to happen next. Like, we have no idea what in the world is going to happen next. And it's just, every race we're coming to, really makes a strong determination on what happens next. Okay, so like Monza, for instance, or not Monza, Monaco. Monaco is the annual procession line, or whatever you want to call it. People tend to not care for that race too much. I'm not one of those people. I think it's fun, even though there's not a lot of overtaking. I find it to be fun. I find it to be fascinating, but most people don't. This year's race pretty much the same kind of thing happened, except for there was just so much going on, and then all of a sudden, all those things happened at the end, and it was just like this race was good. Like I really enjoyed it, and so that's the thing about the overtakes too, guys. I think as motorsports enthusiasts, we get so excited about the overtake or the prospect over overtake. And then you see these overtakes happening, and kind of in your mind, you see the overtake happening. It feels like good racing. And so, like, I'll use IndyCar for my example. IndyCar racing, let's just look at the 500. 500 this year was incredible. Enjoyed it. But I only watched like the last 10 to 12 laps. And I think I got all the experience that I needed to get out of it, because all the laps before that, there were a ton of overtakes happening. But the majority of them were not overtakes for actual track position, if that makes sense. So, flipping back to Formula One. In Formula One, when an overtake happens, that overtake is for track position. Aside from the blue flags, obviously. That track, that you ever have a Lego piece that don't make no sense? This one don't make no sense. An overtake that happens on a Formula One track is something that is not an accident, and not letting you buy me by any means at all. It doesn't really matter. As long as it's not a blue flag, I'm not letting you buy me. No way. So I always said, like, when people were like, oh, well, Max couldn't do the 500 or whatever, and I'm like, if you guys put Max Verstappen in one of those cars and you let him buy you, you're never seeing him again. He's going to be gone. Like, that just is what it is. And it's the same way with all the other Formula One drivers. They're not allowing anybody to get by them, for get by them sake. And so what I say is like, why I bring all this up is, I think that overtaking, whenever it's done on a Formula One track, has to be looked at like, you got to claw for that. You got to fight for that. You got to grind for that. And so, there it is. And so, whenever it does happen, like at Monaco, for instance, you see some of these overtakes happening, the seldom times that it do, it's very exciting. It's kind of like whenever you're watching a football game versus when you're watching a soccer game. Whenever you're watching a soccer game, points come at a premium. Like, it's hard to get them. That's why the scores aren't 50-50. The scores are like 1-0, 1-1. Every now and again, you see somebody score like 2 or 3 goals. Same thing with hockey. Points come at a premium. Very hard to come by. With basketball, the game is much more high paced. Points are, not as at. Points aren't worth as much, basically. They come a lot cheaper. And so every single possession matters on a soccer pitch, for instance. Every overtake matters for a Formula One track. There's no accidental overtakes. There's no, I'm going to let you buy me, aside from the blue flags, obviously. And I think that's what makes Monaco so interesting. Because although there are very few overtakes, there are a lot of attempts. Drivers look for ways to do it. It's just a chess match. You know what I mean? Sometimes chess matches are slower. Sometimes they're faster. And in Monaco is definitely slower. But the idea is we've got to figure out this puzzle. Now, that being said, I'm always been the one that said they've got to, turn that race into an all-star weekend. I don't think that the cars being that size, it makes very much sense for racing. But, aside from that, I really feel like if we're going to have the race, let's enjoy it and let's do it. But, enjoy it for what it is. Enjoy the overtakes for what they are. Anyway, looking forward to the next race coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm fascinated to see if Ferrari can keep the momentum going. How Charles is going to bounce back. He's had a lot of bad luck over the last couple of weeks. And what Mercedes is going to do, specifically George. I'd like to see how George can navigate this. What he's going to do next is going to be a really, really important part of his journey. And so Like I said before, like, subscribe, follow if you haven't already. And this was episode 1. We'll see you next week for episode 2.